ChatGPT was released, that was sort of represents a milestone where the technology was getting good enough that like, hey, that thing we've always wanted to do but was held back is now possible. And because we've been thinking about that for many, many years and we could join the dots quickly, we very quickly kind of pivoted all our energy around this.
Welcome back to another episode of Tech Teams Today. We are joined by Darragh Curran, CTO and Head of Engineering at Intercom. We'll be diving into his journey from builder to CTO, the challenges of scaling AI in production, and how he sees the future of engineering leadership evolving. Darragh, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So you've been at Intercom for 13 years. Congratulations on that. Starting as an IC and moving all the way up to the CTO position. I'm curious what the biggest shift in mindset has been as you've made that sort of transition over a decade.
Big question. These things don't happen like it's more like a boiling the frog type thing. I didn't join thinking, hey, I'm gonna be CTO at a 1,000+ person company. It didn't happen in one change overnight. There was, it was a gradual process over many years, and through which your mindset kind of grows and evolves during that process. I think one of the things that motivated me to join Intercom, and I most previously had been working at Amazon, so like a very big company with a lot of stuff figured out. One of the attractions of joining this thing was I really cared about the environment that you work in as a software engineer, that your philosophy about how you do work, the technology choices, the culture, all of those types of things. So, and I think that that mindset had been there from the very start, and how it showed up is different in different roles, but that I think has been is one of the most important ingredients as a leader, is thinking about it from, it's not about management and command and control, it's about the environment and the conditions you create for people to do great work, basically. So nothing, there might be a better answer, but nothing else has come to mind as there's fundamental shift. I think that the challenges in the different type of role is and I think probably many people struggle in, are going from, hey, I like talking to computers, to oh God, all my job is talking to humans all of a sudden, and it's quite difficult.
Right. And also, and then with that goes going from being an IC to being a leader, basically.
Yeah.
Right. Where as an IC, you're mostly coding, or if not entirely coding. And then you move to a leadership role, and in some cases you might be coding a little bit, but for the most part, you're managing the people who are coding. So that,
yeah.
I'm curious, and obviously I probably should have narrowed the question down a little bit. Was there a particular point at Intercom where you decided to move from an IC role to a leadership role? Or did someone sort of tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, we think you'd be a good fit for a leadership position?
I think for starters, leadership qualities are really important and really valuable in ICs, in individual contributors. So that's kind of one point, and I think it's important to recognize. For me, on my journey, how did it happen? Honestly, when I joined Intercom, I didn't really know what to expect. I think all of the founders had a certain level of a dream of what it could be that is far less than it already has become. And that's partially a symptom of, Ireland 15 years ago just wasn't the environment that created people that had big ambitions for what you could do with a software company. So, we were such fans, still are, of 37 Signal. So we were probably thinking, oh, maybe we'll be like them someday. That'd be kind of cool. A couple of really good products that are loved on a team. Maybe we'll be around 50 people or something. And then you kind of realize that, or then growth in your business starts happening. People are loving the product, and oh damn, we need to build more of it, and we need more people. And I have the pleasure working with Kieran, our kind of founder and founder CTO, and one of the best IC, one of the best technology leaders, full stop, but much more of a draw and a gravitation towards being really hands-on. And he's our chief engineer today to kind of represent that. And I, for better or worse, kind of always had a little bit more of a leaning towards, you know, how we grow and lead teams and whatnot. So there was a kind of natural division that happened pretty early on. I gravitated a little bit more towards the product side. He gravitated a little bit more towards the infrastructure side, and most of the team growth was in building the product. So it's sort of like organic, but also like I think represented like the interests and maybe strengths of myself and Kieran alongside each other there.
Yeah, it's good to have those
from
two
pretty early on.
perspectives.
Yeah, I think it was like, I mean, we kind of got lucky in that regard. Like, so from very early on, we had both like a, chief engineer and a sort of VP Eng type person, a very good hands-on CTO and a VP Eng. And a lot of companies end up realizing they have a little bit of one and they go try to find the other. And I think we got lucky in that regard.
Yeah, it's good to have both. Are obviously very complementary.
Yeah.
I'm curious, sort of, Intercom's a pretty classic example of product-led growth. And I'm curious your perspective on how your model was sort of able to make that happen and how that scaled, probably, I would say, in the last 5 years, significantly. I remember even 5 years ago, there was very few websites you couldn't find Intercom on. I'm curious what you would attribute that massive PLG success to. And I'm sure it's not just one thing. But.
Yeah, like I'll give maybe a contrarian answer in a second, because I think we lost our way at times. But the thing that I think contributed, or well, perhaps to understand, like where did Intercom originate from? It originated from a team of people who themselves were, like any of our customers today, trying to build and run a software business, trying to build something great in the world, and realizing that they had the tools to do that, and to run a business and to have connection with your customers in the way that we wanted weren't there. But fundamentally, it was a group of people who cared about building product, and Intercom just happened to be the opportunity they went hardest after. But they're a group of product-loving people, and I think part of what works with like very simple things that work with PLG are like the difference between a company that will actually let you see and use the product versus hide it behind a load of kind of bullshit and behind the curtain. And it's of course natural if you're a product builder and you're proud of what you're building, whether you've joined the dots and figured out this might be good for business growth, you kind of just want to show it to the world. So like some of that might have simply been kind of almost accidental. And, a lot of Intercom's growth in the early days came from kind of that community connection with other people who had thought similarly. So like, it's kind of funny, like we're selling, on the surface, maybe we were selling like product for support teams, but most of our resonance in the market was with like product teams who liked what we were doing and maybe influenced their company in that direction. But anyway, certainly one part of it was this idea of, hey, fundamentally we care about product, we want to show it to the world, and I think it's a good thing to show and let people see your thing, and if it's good for them, they'll use it. So like a low barrier for seeing and trying your product, I think, is a core part of PLG. And then I think it's always kind of been our belief to kind of play the long term, and if you can continue to delight folks with your product, many of those companies will grow up over a long period of time. So we've most of our revenue comes from much bigger companies, but most of our bigger companies started really small. And I think if you take more of a enterprise approach to trying to acquire smaller companies, they just run a mile. They don't want to often don't want to talk to sales or don't want to do all those types of jumping through hoops. But in time, they'll need that. And, I think what we've done a pretty okay job of is doing both sides, like serving the small guys well and catering for them as they get really big.
Yeah, because I remember there was a point where you could literally just sign up for Intercom, take a JavaScript snippet, add it to your website, and you really didn't need to deal with support or sales. Just very
Yeah,
easy implementation, right?
that's definitely that's kind of like the Stripe story. They didn't in the early days they didn't invent something fundamentally new. They just made it a hell of a lot easier. And I think removing friction is the general kind of principle there.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about AI. It's kind of hard to talk to an engineering leader today without talking about AI. So you guys have rolled out a product called Fin, which is sort of the heart of your strategy now with artificial intelligence. I'm just curious, sort of what if you could tell us a little bit about it, and then also what were some of the biggest challenges building, essentially rebuilding your strategy around AI, which a lot of software companies or every software company probably has had to do in the past couple of years. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I think you're right that every company is, whether they know it or not, going to have to rewrite themselves in this era, and if they haven't, it'll happen to them, and they'll be left behind. I think for us, like, not that the work is easy, but the application is probably more obvious than in most domains, with like customer service starting there. There's like it's always been our vision that, and we've been working on AI parts of customer service for maybe about 8 years. But in the last, let's say, three, the technology breakthroughs just like opened up what previously had been a someday thing to this is real today. Yeah, so like wind back the clock to when ChatGPT was released. That was sort of represents a milestone where the technology was getting good enough that, like, hey, that thing we've always wanted to do but was held back is now possible. And because we've been thinking about that for many, many years, and we could join the dots quickly, we very quickly kind of pivoted all our energy around this, and I guess bet the farm to an extent that we did not go slow and cautious here. We said, no, this is our future. We must invest as heavily as fast as we can to build a great team and build a product in this space. And so I don't, any success we have today, I think a lot of it is down, a lot of credit due to Owen, our CEO, of just having, like, backing that belief that, like, hey, we're going this direction. It's going to be bumpy. And then pulling that off, I think, has been very interesting, because we go from being like, perhaps a pretty good company at building conventional SaaS product, like, and we care a lot about the craft there, etc., to building AI product, which is very, very different. And like, there's obviously some overlap, but in a conventional SaaS product, I think a lot of it is about understanding the the customer jobs to be done, or the particular thing you're trying to do, and rarely is technology kind of a barrier there. If you can understand the problem well enough, you can execute against it. With AI, you've got this question of capability. Like, is the capability good enough to deliver against the problem you want to tackle? So it kind of flips the model a lot more to be technology first, or technology centric. And with AI technology, I think it's a different skill set, different expertise. So we kind of had to rebuild our R&D org around this AI first kind of idea. And at the start of that was awkward. That was like almost like organ rejection. We've got all these people who see the world differently, and surely they're wrong, right? Like, and so it's been a bit of a journey in terms of figuring out how to actually build product in this way. And for us, like, I think we've adapted to that really fast. I think a lot of incumbents are going to be quite in trouble here if they fail to figure it out. I think a lot of the new companies born in this era are default kind of AI first in their approach, and probably led by people who understand this well. So yeah, I think I feel great about how we've responded. We've got like Fin itself is incredible product, and I'd love to maybe chat a little bit more about that. But at the core of it has been willingness to bet on this, having like pretty clear conviction in the product direction and what's possible, and then a huge amount of organizational change around delivering a different type of product.
Yeah, because it's such a huge shift. I remember, I think it was, probably early 2023, and speaking to so many or listening to so many engineering leaders in SaaS, kind of getting asked the same question around, well, what are you guys doing to adopt an AI strategy? Or what is your AI strategy? When ChatGPT had only been released 3 months beforehand. And so the answers are, you would listen to the answers, and if you were a technical person, you would know this person doesn't know the answer to this question. Most of these companies actually have no idea what their AI strategy is, but they're giving answers that might sound acceptable to an investor relations or a securities analyst or something like that. And then a lot of them had to sort of like reverse engineer that answer, right? Of like, okay, go to their technical team and say, all right, we just told everyone on Wall Street we're going to become an AI powered platform now.
Yeah,
figure out how we're going to make that happen, right? And that's tough.
Like in the early days of customer support product space, like all the early stuff was like sprinkles in the product, like rewrite this thing, or translate this thing, and just interesting that like little toy features, and that's what it looks like when you underestimate the potential impact that AI can have. And in fact, with Fin as the example, it's like, hey, you're thinking about it wrong. This is not about trying to make the human a little bit better at the job. It's about the technology is capable enough to do the work. And I think incumbent companies will, whether they realize it or not, be so kind of anchored to what has worked for them in the past that it can be hard to like, think about it quite differently.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest differentiators is what you touched on earlier about going all in, right? And I think some companies, or a decent amount, were hesitant in the beginning because you're so used to what you've been doing and how you've been doing it as an engineering leader for so long. All of a sudden, this vastly new technology comes along, and now you're supposed to change your entire way of doing things, right? And so I feel like, I was at a startup at the time in early 2023 where we just were lucky, fortunately, had just acquired a bunch of AI companies. And this is before ChatGPT had even come out. So we were already all in on AI without knowing what was coming down the pike. And then we're like, oh, thank God we just happened to buy these sort of OCR and IDP and sort of AI adjacent technologies, and sort of went all in on AI while our competitors were like way behind us. So I think it kind of speaks to, it's a little bit of mix of luck, timing, conviction, and really like going all in.
Yeah, we certainly had, like, I don't know how much the Intercom story, but the timing was like, the timing was a couple of things for us. We had been a product for like old things for old people, and within a space of maybe 8 weeks, we decided one big thing, which was, what, I know we've got a good product and good customers in say a marketing use case or maybe a product or sales type use case, but we're actually going to focus all on service. We're going to focus there. And that decision was independent of what was about to happen a few weeks later, which is, the breakthroughs with LLMs. And so that was, I think, quite lucky, because I think we landed on the focused area that has the most obvious and like huge opportunity to tackle, and one which we had a little bit of prior art in with our old resolution bot. So yeah, definitely timing, definitely look at having the expertise, like you said, with your acquisitions or whatever. we weren't starting cold. We had a lot of like prior knowledge. We knew where the limits were and how this technology allowed us to get past them. So yeah, I think we're quite fortunate. But then it still takes also the courage to go all in, basically, which I think we've really benefited from.
Yeah, but the thing is, when you're going all in, you don't know, yeah, especially going back a couple of years, it's still a risk. It still feels like a risk. And then looking back, you're like, well,
Yeah,
that was a great decision and thank God we made it. But when you're making it, you're like, especially if no one else is making it or not a lot of people are making it or you're not sure,
yeah,
it's definitely feels like a big gamble, but that's technology, right?
yeah.
So when it comes to AI strategy, I'm curious like how you think about what should be built in-house versus what should be leveraged from existing platforms and large language models and things like that.
Right. Um, There's probably like a good framework for this. I mean, more generally than AI, I think I definitely have strong beliefs around leveraging the strength of other libraries, platform systems, etc. Like that's not core to the unique value that you're providing. So the less software you can run, the better as a kind of general principle. Unless the software is kind of core and unique and differentiating for your business and like drives growth in your business. With AI, I think a kind of pattern that we've seen and believe in a lot ourselves is build the thing with the powerful general purpose models that exist. Like don't start it like again. You don't prematurely optimize. There's like these are wonderfully powerful things and leverage them. And if the idea works, the product works, and then you afford yourself the opportunity to say, hey, can I gain better performance here? I think so. It's never like a one or the other thing. It's a little bit of both, but maybe to like ground this in a little bit of real context. When we launched Fin and the kind of shape of most AI products in the early days, like the perception was and still is in large parts that like, hey, it's kind of like a thin wrapper around this like wonderful LLM model or whatever. And I think that's arguably true about very very early versions of Fin. It's like a well constructed prompt or set of prompts using a powerful frontier model. But the real art of building an AI product, I think, is like, and Fin's a good example. ChatGPT is another example. The surface area of the product hasn't massively changed, right? Like it's like a little chat interface.
Right.
But
For the end
when you look
user, right?
for the end user, exactly. But when
Yeah.
you look at the performance, like on our website, we've got this chart we're quite proud of like this resolution rate, which is our, when Fin actually does its job, does the work, does a good job, and that average across all our customers climbing from 23% in the early first month of life to like I think 69 is their latest figure, and that represents just a phenomenal, maybe 65, phenomenal difference in like the power of the product. The surface area is the same. Like, so you're like, okay, well, what's going on under the hood? Very, very few of those like gains are a result of like, an upgrade to the, frontier LLM we use. It's all actually internal in the, AI layer of our product. And, so it's Fin has grown to be this way more complicated than like simple single prompts around a model. It's a quite complicated architecture with lots of parts decomposed. And in the early days of that, again, many of these parts are sort of off the shelf but fit for purpose. Like you don't use the big GPT-4 for doing small little tasks. You don't do those with purpose fit models. And then but again, thinking about the models is even kind of the wrong way to look at this. The way the muscle that enabled us to drive that improvement isn't we're good at selecting which models to use. It's your ability to use them in a way that gives you the results you want, which in an AI product world, I think it comes from your ability to experiment. Can you like make a change, determine whether it performs better or worse in the direction you care about? So I think I'd attribute a lot of our success with Fin and just the rigor and culture and skills and technology we have around iterating on the performance of our product. And when you have that, then that affords you the ability to say, hey, is this model better? Is that model better? Or what if we create a custom model for this part of the system? Can we, so I think if you skip to the, hey, do I build or buy part without having the discipline to, it won't matter what you do. Like neither will give you a good outcome. You need the discipline for how you actually harness the technology in the first place.
Yeah, and if you have the ability to constantly be running experiments to tell you, okay, with this model, our customers are performing X, Y, or Z better than with
Yeah.
this model, then yeah, it's you. You have so much data to make your decision based off of rather than hype or gut feeling or something like that. So shifting gears to sort of team and org design and culture. So Intercom has hubs from Dublin to London and San Francisco, and I might be missing one or two. What have you learned sort of about building and leading distributed teams, especially growing so fast and keeping a cohesive sort of engineering culture?
Um, yeah, many things I think. So yeah, we are Intercom's interesting in that we're a US company founded by Irish folks with a corporate headquarters in San Francisco. Most of our go-to-market and finance in San Francisco, but then majority of our R&D in Dublin and London. One of our kind of strong cultural kind of beliefs or preferences from the early days has been we we actually enjoyed and believe in the power of working together, like face to face, etc. So for the longest time until kind of COVID came along, we were like many companies leaned heavily on that, and London kind of came about at a time where we felt we were struggling to grow and attract the right type of talent to keep up with our hiring ambitions in Dublin. So we kind of Dublin's always been the hub for R&D, but London and San Francisco at different times have been, um, uh, components of it too. And I think, yeah, so always this preference for like close proximity to people, kind of decomposing that a little bit. I think what you get with close proximity is a lot of just like cultural assimilation and learning from each other and like faster communication, less misunderstanding, etc. So going distributed or multi-site has always presented challenges. One one kind of I think pretty common sense thing that we certainly leaned into heavily when we went from one location to multiple was you really got to invest heavily in like how you bootstrap a new site, how you like uh, uh, set it up in the right way with the right people to recreate the culture you want to attract the people you want, and as part of that, I think you got to give new sites like if you treat them as kind of second class entities, then they'll become that. I think you got to treat them and give them the best type of work and expect the best type of work from them. So yeah, the combination of like bootstrapping with the right people to build the right culture, but also giving the right ownership and high expectations, I think is something that I always lean and repeat on when we're doing those types of things. Yeah. Any kind of other aspect? I know it's a very broad question, so I could go.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of an answer I've gotten when I ask about how do you make remote engineers more productive and feel part of the team when you have a hybrid setup? And the best answer I've gotten is treat all engineers the same, whether they're in the office with you or at home. Don't do any whiteboarding in the office or anything in the office that the developer at home can't be a part of. And I think that's a pretty good answer. And I think there's sort of a parallel to what you're describing, right?
Yeah, like what you just said there, I think is good general advice. I feel a little bit sad about that. We had this early dilemma in Intercom where we hadn't really encountered this question yet of, hey, will we hire remote? Like that sounds like a good idea. We hired someone, good engineer, good person, but I think remote's a good strategy if you go all in, and you can do what you say and you can kind of normalize how you behave with remote being the default assumption. If you're not all in, it can be very messy and you can be like, okay, I'm kind of for a small minority, I'm kind of compromising a bunch of how we might work and like, you can have way less ad hoc conversations that kind of have to be planned or maybe there's good solutions to that too. But so we certainly kind of took that more opinionated stance that like, we believe there's benefit to the freedom we get working in person, and let's kind of not pull down to like a lower common denominator. But again, it's not one is better than the other. I think being in the middle is the worst. Like, being sort of, so our actual experience with, or we of course do have a bunch of folks working remotely, and the pattern that works really well for us is where most of those folks are folks who have spent many years working co-located with teammates and have all of the culture. They know that, they know the company inside out, and I think that overcomes a lot of the things you might otherwise have to engineer around to have an effective remote culture.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that you started off by saying it makes me sad a little bit because I mean, my first 10 years in my career, I was always in offices,
Yeah,
in pods with full of engineers and going to lunch with engineers, sometimes dinner, weekends, nights. And you have this sort of, culture of like almost like a family or a platoon or something, right?
yeah,
Where you're all going through the thick of it together and you're seeing each other in person and you celebrate your victories, but you also are there for each other for your losses. And, now I'm going on 6, 7 years of working remotely and I'm kind of, sometimes I'm like, man, I miss those
yeah,
days, right? But then on the flip side, I don't have to commute an hour into the city and an hour back every day. And, there are definitely pros and cons, but
for sure.
some people adapted to remote work much better than others and some much faster than others, right? But you sort of
Yeah,
had no choice, right? In most cases, unless you're fortunate to be in like a major tech hub like San Francisco, for
yeah.
example, or Manhattan, maybe, or Brooklyn for that matter. So moving on to the last round of questions here. So you've described yourself as a pragmatic generalist engineer, which I think I would also ascribe to as well. How do you spot and sort of nurture that same type of approach in new hires when you're hiring at such a large scale?
Yeah, maybe a couple of ways. Like for starters, I don't think this is like an uncommon thing to do. But perhaps a decade ago it was like whenever we've been hiring, we've never gone to the market and said like, we want Ruby on Rails engineer or we want a Java engineer or whatever. So we've always like broadened the net to the population of people who are good at building software, regardless of what current form that takes. And then within that, I think we look for people who are. It's kind of how I think about it, at least, is like you want people who are have all the depth of technology, but it's in their back pocket, and what they care about is the product or impact they're having. So they're like impact oriented rather than technology oriented. But that's no good unless you also have the technology in your back pocket. So you want
Right.
people who kind of think about the impact of the work, think about the customer, can kind of join the dots, and that, or for us at least, that's what mattered because we were building quite a new product, a product where like a lot of our edge was, hey, we think that software can be better, and you want engineers who believe that and have an opinion about that too. So I guess some of that generalist is captured in this ability to like, hey, I don't identify as like a specialist in X, but I can find and become good enough in any X to deliver the impact that I'm going after. And then I think pragmatism part, I think for me at least, is anchored in the kind of impact of your work. And I've seen or been part of too many teams or cultures where engineers are kind of isolated from that a little bit. They're kind of just told, like, hey, here's what we need to deliver. And often they're like, hey, I don't think this is a good idea, but you're telling me and I can't influence it. So I'm just going to do it. And that environment often, engineers have wonderful skills and creativity, and that creativity then goes into like the technology and like, because they don't really believe in what they're building, so they might as well make the world interesting for themselves with the technology. Anyway, the pragmatic bit for me is about all of that energy oriented around like the product and like customer impact, and the engineering is the skill set you bring to bring that to life, rather than technology for technology's sake kind of oriented folks. So, and it's kind of funny because like I think the best technologists, or many of the best technologists, are of this shape, but they could be, they could hold their own against like adjacent disciplines like a product manager or even a product designer at times. Some of them are that far down that spectrum. Yeah.
And I think that is the future of engineers and of senior engineers, whatever you want to call it, is language agnostic, right? Especially with AI coding agents. It's like if you know one or two languages or frameworks, you can probably learn a new one or a different one fairly easily. And if you have that technology mindset and product mindset in your back pocket, being a specialist in one language or framework is not as important as it probably was 10 years ago. All right.
Yeah, and there's definitely a place for like deep specialism. Like it's hard to get past that, and like I know we have a few wonderful people on our team that I'd say started in that generalist kind of mold, but have ended up going really deep, and that depth is incredibly valuable and unique. And I think the AI domain is an example of that, where like I think there'll be a lot more reliance on people with real depth there, and how do you complement them with other skills in the stack. But yeah.
So going into that subject with a little more depth, no pun intended. So AI co-pilots. So I ask most guests this question because I've seen it in my day to day. So there's sort of two generations of engineers now, right? There are the engineers that started off coding when there were no AI coding agents, and you just opened up an IDE with a blank screen and you wrote all the boilerplate yourself and built all the classes and functions and if else's and a lot of manual tedious coding, right? And a lot of troubleshooting and a lot of Stack Overflow chaos. Then there's sort of this emerging generation of developers that started coding with AI assistants and co-pilots and things like Cursor and Windsurf and whatnot. I'm curious sort of where you think the future senior engineering leaders will come from with that sort of dichotomy of different types of origin stories for developers.
Yeah. Like I guess one of the fears people might have of like folks who learn in the era of like cursors and Claude codes, etc., is people who are prolific at their ability to create stuff, but very below the bar at their ability to understand stuff. And I so for what's worth, I don't think that's a risk that plays out at the extreme. I think a lot of people, most people, I'd imagine, learning to, going down a traditional route to like learning to become a software engineer, like, doing a computer science degree or whatever, they're already on a path to learn the fundamentals. And I think the right curiosity and the right set of fundamentals, you can kind of go and understand most things. But I guess what I'm pointing to is, in a world where AI can produce a lot for you, understanding remains really, really important, and how your ability to quickly understand stuff. I think I don't have any strong opinion on like, hey, will all the leaders emerge from one batch or the other? I think the batch that are going to be most at risk are the ones who, like, maybe my generation who learned their craft way before all of this, but who don't have a curiosity and an open mind and like, try to relearn or become expert in the new tools available. So I think that's the real differentiator, the degree to which a person is willing to like relearn the craft.
Yeah. And everyone has sort of had to, but I have heard I speak to a lot of engineering leaders, and I have heard some cases where people will be like, yeah, I have a few people on my team that actually don't use AI coding editors. And I'm like, really? Like,
Yeah, like
interesting.
I believe that clearly that was everybody 5 years ago,
Right.
or and many great people who were like in the top 1% of the industry weren't doing that, obviously, and so they could still be great, and perhaps they can still outgun many of their peers today. But I think it's a losing battle,
A
like
dubious proposition. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, maybe there's a niche there for some people. Uh, perhaps it's more pure and more fun for some. But I think if you're thinking about raw potential impact, then it's pretty naive to not be open-minded to magnitude of impact these tools could have on our ability to create things. And you kind of see that in the explosion of kind of creativity enabled by vibe coding tools like that. you know if the person with no understanding of software can create all these wonderful things, what can the person who's got deep understanding of software do? And if the answer is, if you believe the answer is nothing, then I think you're going to be caught off guard.
Yeah. I think something else about the generation coming up now, developers sort of native to AI code editors, is, you said prolific builders. If you're a prolific builder and you're also taking the time to understand what you're building. So, you put a prompt in, you get a bunch of code, you test it, it works. Then you go back and you ask it to break down exactly how it works. So I think there's sort of a split even amongst that generation of the people who are taking the time to do that and learn along the way, and the people who are just sort of keep all, just
Yeah,
going through it. Then you have this huge code base that you don't understand at all. So yeah, you might have built something probably not production ready, but something that might be cool. But you don't understand fundamentally how it works. On the other hand, you could be the curious type who, as you're building it, you're learning how it's being built, sort of not by you essentially, but you're sort of guiding it and then
yeah,
asking it, step by step through the build process. Okay, summarize everything that you just built. And then you can ask it more questions. If you're not 100% sure on the way something works, you can ask it to clarify it for you, right? So it's in the eye of the beholder. It's how you use the technology, right? So
yeah.
that's
We've
sort of my thinking.
we've internally, a memo I shared externally, but had this drive to apply a really open and curious mind and kind of beginner's mindset to I believe these tools, if harnessed correctly, can enable us to be twice as productive, and folks have leaned really hard into that. We've seen some interesting kind of side effects, I guess, and some of this is just learnings for us to kind of tune our approach. But one of the kind of side effects has been, and like maybe the consequence of like the pressure to deliver at pace, people feel compelled to maybe skip over some of those steps. And like, I don't know, the challenge that we've always had even before AI is this tension between speed and quality. And I think AI throws petrol on that, that like fire. Um, and the way I've kind of been thinking about it of late is, there's a big difference between like a single person project and like a few hundred people working on a thing. And and it's something that lives for many decades potentially as a product. And the quality, internal quality, and your ability for your team to be quickly effective and productive in that system is of such paramount importance. And one of the slippery slopes, I think, is this idea that you're just moving fast, but you're accumulating all of this like stuff that either people don't understand or is of dubious quality. And my hope is that we can kind of counteract that tension by, first and foremost, you got to care about quality. You got to understand how your system works. You got to be opinionated. If you can be sufficiently opinionated on all these things, then I think you can harness these tools in a way that is in line with, the thing you care about, which is quality code that you can understand and iterate on quickly and doesn't slow you down. But untamed, you're mostly not going to get that. You're mostly going to get a prolific amount of slop.
Yes, it's funny you use the word slop. I keep hearing that term of just slop code.
Yeah.
But
So like you
yeah,
got to balance the two things. Like I think you got to care about the craft. You got to care about the quality. You got to care about the structure and architecture of your software. Maybe in the future you won't have to, but I think right now that if you pass on those things, you'll get caught off guard.
I'm curious. How do you think hiring engineers has changed with the advent of all these AI co-pilots?
I think it's changed quite a bit, or certainly my attitude has changed in that now my expectation is that what people can demonstrate in like a interview process, and we've always wanted as part of our interview process people kind of doing their job, like simulating kind of real work. So my expectation of what people can demonstrate in a time box of whatever couple of hours is much higher in this era. So implicitly, I expect, and we will select for the people who are able to harness these tools well and be effective and productive. But also, we try to, I guess, structure our process so that it's a combination of being effective and productive and being able to understand and communicate how things work and the concepts behind it. So I guess the primary change is just like this raises the expectations of what people can do.
And also, it sounds like you're also looking for how good they are at leveraging AI tools, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Precisely that. And like, I think it's kind of telling, like, you'll have people work in companies who perhaps haven't, and hopefully this is a dwindling number, but maybe who actively reject the use of these tools. It's against whatever some budget or policy or whatever else. But irrespective of that, I think in times of change like this, the best people will be those who are independently curious and will have like in their own time tried a bunch of these things and have opinions about what works and that kind of quickly shows up in a interview process where you'll have like the folks who wow you and you often might learn something from versus others who are maybe it's the first time that they've interacted with like a cursor or something.
So last couple questions here. So you've led teams through some crazy changes over the last decade, probably starting with mobile, social, cloud, SaaS, hypergrowth, and now artificial intelligence. What common sort of leadership patterns have you seen across the board, regardless of what the wave was that engineering leaders should be paying attention to today?
Good question. I think two things come to mind. Like one thing is when there are substantial changes in our industry from a technology point of view, or I think it's incumbent on us as engineering leaders to be very curious about those changes, to get like our hands on with the implications of those, build that intuition yourself. Don't rely on just like what you read or whatever. Get some really tangible hands on experience, be that like 10, 15 years ago with cloud or now with AI. Like I think you'll do your best job in leading and guiding if you're not sort of abstracted away in the org chart from the details. And then I think the other bit that comes to mind and there's a little bit of maybe, I don't know, some kind of confirmation bias here or whatever. But the people who are most successful through any of these waves are the ones who like are most bold and ambitious when they arise. Now, maybe there's some false starts that trip people up on like different technologies or whatever, but I think the combination of getting hands-on and getting an intuition yourself, and then when you see that pushing as hard in the direction of the potential implications, and that the absence of that is what you'll see in many incumbent companies where they're like, hey, that's too different. That's too different than what we're doing. We can't, that does not compute, but it's potentially exactly what you need.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also goes back to what we were discussing earlier about sort of the resistance to adaptability or change. And I think, like you just said, that's what will make you stand out as a company or as an individual, right? Is as these waves come along. Like I remember when mobile came along, it was like, oh my God, I need to learn Swift or Objective-C, or, I just spent all this time learning, PHP and JavaScript, and now all the hiring jobs are all for mobile engineers, right? And I'm sure I'm not the only one who went through that. And then cloud came along, and it was like, all right, we need to rebuild the whole platform for AWS. And it was like, okay, let's do it, and let's map it out. But in some cases, I remember people being like, over my dead body, we're staying on-prem forever, and we'll just build a web app that can be used on mobile. We're not going to go mobile native, right? And who do you think were the winners in those types of decisions, right? The ones that sort of ride the wave, don't run from it.
I think that's generally true. And then I think in our industry you also have to be careful of like, what waves you ride. Like again,
Very true.
They have to be in the direction of some impact you're really chasing. So like there quite probably are many businesses that their core competency and like what value they provide isn't meaningfully changed by AI, and it would be foolish for them to just disrupt that. Or companies that had like a really good muscle of running on-prem or their own sort of data center stuff may not have gotten any upside from the move to the cloud. Perhaps they did, perhaps they didn't. But like, the point being that like, yes, be quick and ride hell for leather on a wave if it's going in a direction that matters for you, and that's not always the case.
Well, it is a good surfing analogy, which is the best surfers.
I'm a terrible surfer.
I'm not great either, but a big part of being a good surfer is knowing which wave to ride and which wave to let go, even though everyone else might be chasing it. But my last question is, what advice would you give to engineers that are aspiring to be engineering leaders one day?
I don't know. Don't grow up too fast. Really build the craft. I think the best engineering leaders, in my experience or my perspective, are the ones who are hungriest to have impact in what they do, and who are excellent at what they do, and sort of hit some natural ceiling where almost in a way that pains them, they realize in order to have greater impact, the best way for them to do that is to step up in the org and influence more people. But I would, our lives are, simultaneously very short, but they take a long time to pass, and I wouldn't rush it. I think, and also I've seen some brilliant examples of people who will like do multiple laps of this, and particularly in this era of like technology change, I've huge conviction that leaders will just get caught off guard by being disconnected from the details, disconnected from the technology. So I'm certainly an advocate for people who, become excellent at the fundamental job. If you skip that step, I don't think you're going to be a great leader. But also don't be afraid to go back to that again at some point. I think that's often where our love is in the first place too. So yeah.
Well, yeah, that makes sense because the fundamentals can change, right? So you learn the fundamentals 15 years ago, not the same as they are today. So, hey, thanks for coming on the show. Really interesting conversation. I love your contrarian takes on a lot of things. Really exciting stuff you guys are doing at Intercom and Fin in particular. I'll include a link in the show notes. For the audience, if you liked the episode, don't forget to like it and subscribe to Tech Teams Today. We're on all major podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Darragh.
Thanks, Matt. Cheers.